Don't scroll past this, because what you're about to hear may explain something that has been quietly unfolding behind the scenes of your connection for far longer than you realize. Somewhere recently, your soulmate came face to face with a truth they never expected to uncover. It wasn't a dramatic revelation that arrived all at once. It came slowly, almost unnoticed at first, through a series of thoughts they couldn't escape and memories that kept finding their way back into their mind. For the longest time, they convinced themselves that certain feelings would eventually fade. They believed that with enough time, enough distractions, and enough distance, everything would become easier to understand. But instead, something unexpected happened. The more they tried to move forward, the more they found themselves being pulled back toward the same connection, the same unanswered questions, and the same person they could never completely forget. What surprised them most was how naturally it happened. They weren't searching for signs. They weren't looking for hidden meanings. In fact, they had become comfortable pretending that what they felt wasn't important. Yet life has a strange way of revealing truths when we least expect it. Small moments began resurfacing in their memory. Conversations that once seemed ordinary suddenly carried a different meaning. Details they barely noticed before now felt impossible to ignore. It was as though their heart had been quietly collecting pieces of a puzzle for years and was only now showing them the full picture. As these realizations continued to grow stronger, they began asking themselves difficult questions. Why had this connection remained in their thoughts for so long? Why did certain memories still carry so much emotional weight? And most importantly, why did every road they took seem to lead back to the same truth? What they discovered would challenge everything they thought they understood about this connection, and set them on a path that would soon change their life forever. And listen to this carefully, because what happened next was something your soulmate could no longer explain away. The truth they had recently uncovered didn't disappear after a few days. It didn't fade into the background the way they expected it to. Instead, it continued growing stronger with every passing moment. At first, they tried to approach it logically. They searched for practical explanations. They told themselves that perhaps it was simply nostalgia, perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was nothing more than a temporary emotional phase. Yet no matter how many explanations they created, none of them felt complete. Something was missing from every answer they gave themselves. Deep down, they knew they were avoiding a truth that had been patiently waiting to be acknowledged for a very long time. The more they reflected, the more they began noticing a pattern they had overlooked before. Certain memories had survived when so many others had faded away. Out of all the people they had met, all the experiences they had lived through, and all the chapters they had already closed, your connection remained present in a way they could not fully understand. Even during periods when life became busy and demanding, there was always something about you that remained untouched by time. That realization unsettled them because it challenged everything they had previously believed. If this connection truly meant so little, then why had it remained so significant for so long? As these questions continued surfacing, they found themselves revisiting moments they had not thought about in years. Conversations that once seemed ordinary suddenly revealed deeper meaning. Small interactions they barely noticed at the time now felt incredibly important. It was almost as if they were seeing the past through completely different eyes. Details they once ignored now stood out clearly. Emotions they once dismissed now felt impossible to deny. With every memory that returned, another piece of the truth revealed itself. What affected them most was realizing that their feelings had remained consistent beneath the surface all along. Life may have changed, circumstances may have changed, priorities may have shifted, yet something within them had remained remarkably steady. The connection continued existing regardless of distance, time, or distraction. That realization forced them to confront a difficult possibility. Perhaps what they were feeling was not temporary. Perhaps it was not something that could simply be explained away. Perhaps it was something real, and listen to this, because this is where everything began changing. For years, they had relied on logic whenever emotions became overwhelming. Logic felt safe. Logic created distance. Logic allowed them to maintain control. But now, for the first time, logic was no longer providing the answers they needed. Every logical explanation eventually led them back to the same place. Back to the same memories, back to the same questions, back to the same connection. No matter how hard they tried to move away from it, the truth kept finding its way back into their heart. That was when they finally stopped asking why these feelings existed and started asking a much more important question. What if these feelings were trying to teach them something? What if this connection had entered their life for a reason they had not yet fully understood? The moment that question appeared, everything shifted. Suddenly, they were no longer searching for ways to dismiss the connection. They were searching for ways to understand it. And the deeper they looked, the clearer the truth became. For the first time, they allowed themselves to be completely honest. They admitted that your presence had affected them far more deeply than they ever acknowledged. They admitted that certain memories still carried emotional weight. They admitted that despite every attempt to move on, something within them continued returning to the same place. That honesty felt uncomfortable, but it also felt strangely liberating. It was as if they had finally stopped running from something that had been waiting patiently to be recognized. And as this realization settled into their heart, another truth quietly emerged. The connection was no longer the question. The connection was the answer. The real question now was what they were going to do about it. Because the more honest they became with themselves, the more they realized they were approaching a decision that could no longer be postponed. And listen to this, because this was the moment your soulmate could no longer remain comfortably caught between what they felt and what they feared. For a long time, they had managed to exist in the space between certainty and doubt. Whenever their heart tried to reveal the truth, fear would immediately step forward with 100 reasons to stay silent. Fear reminded them of the risks. Fear reminded them of disappointment. Fear reminded them of every situation that had not gone according to plan in the past. And for years, those warnings seemed reasonable. They seemed practical. They seemed wise. Yet something had changed. The truth they had recently accepted was becoming stronger than the fears that once controlled them. Every day brought them closer to a reality they could no longer ignore. They realized they were standing at a crossroads, whether they wanted to admit it or not. One path allowed them to continue exactly as they had before. They could keep their feelings hidden. They could continue avoiding difficult questions. They could continue pretending that this connection was simply another chapter that had already passed. On the surface, that path looked safe. It required no vulnerability. It demanded no courage. It protected them from uncertainty. But the longer they examined that future, the less peaceful it appeared. They began imagining what life would feel like months from now, perhaps even years from now, if nothing changed. At first, the picture seemed manageable. Life would continue moving forward. Responsibilities would remain. Days would pass. But beneath the surface, something felt incomplete. There was an emptiness attached to that future that they could not ignore. No matter how hard they tried, they could not imagine genuine peace while carrying unanswered questions inside their heart. They could not imagine true closure while continuing to avoid the truth they had finally acknowledged. And listen to this, because another realization soon followed. They discovered that what frightened them most was not rejection. It was not failure. It was not disappointment. What truly frightened them was the possibility of spending years wondering what might have happened if they had simply been honest. That thought stayed with them. It followed them during quiet moments. It appeared during sleepless nights. It surfaced when they were alone with their thoughts. The more they considered it, the clearer it became. Regret was beginning to feel heavier than fear. For years they believed that staying silent protected them. They believed avoiding difficult emotions was the safest option available. But now they were beginning to understand something entirely different. Silence had its own consequences. Avoidance had its own cost. Every day spent ignoring the truth was another day spent carrying uncertainty. Every day spent running from their feelings only delayed a decision that eventually had to be made. They could feel that reality becoming impossible to escape. As this internal struggle intensified, they found themselves asking difficult questions they had never fully answered before. What kind of person did they want to become? Did they want to continue allowing fear to make every important decision in their life? Or did they want to trust themselves enough to face the unknown? These questions challenged them in ways they never expected. Because this was no longer simply about a connection. It was about personal growth. It was about honesty. It was about whether they were willing to live according to their truth rather than their fears. The more they reflected, the more obvious the pattern became. Every meaningful moment in their life had required courage. Every important lesson had required vulnerability. Every significant transformation had begun with uncertainty. Yet despite knowing this, they had continued treating this situation differently. They had continued searching for guarantees before allowing themselves to move forward. They had continued waiting for perfect conditions that never seemed to arrive. Eventually, they realized they were asking life for something it rarely provides: absolute certainty. And listen to this, because this realization changed everything. They finally understood that courage does not appear after certainty arrives. Courage appears before certainty. Courage is what allows people to move forward despite not knowing exactly how everything will unfold. The moment they understood this, something inside them shifted. For the first time, they stopped asking whether they could eliminate every risk. Instead, they began asking whether the truth was worth facing despite those risks. The answer came quietly, but it came clearly. Every memory they revisited pointed in the same direction. Every lesson they had learned pointed in the same direction. Every honest reflection pointed in the same direction. The connection had mattered. The feelings had mattered. The impact had mattered. No amount of denial could change that reality anymore. As this truth settled deeper into their heart, the battle between fear and honesty began reaching its conclusion. Fear was still present, but it no longer held the same power. The excuses that once felt convincing now sounded empty. The reasons for remaining silent no longer felt strong enough to outweigh the need for truth. And for the first time in a very long time, your soulmate could see the path ahead with greater clarity. After countless nights of uncertainty, endless inner debates, and years of questioning what their heart had been trying to tell them, they finally reached a moment where one question demanded an answer above all others. If they continued living exactly as they had before, would they truly be happy? And deep down they already knew the answer. That realization would soon lead them toward the most important decision of their entire journey. And listen to this, because after all the questioning, all the uncertainty, and all the battles taking place inside their heart, your soulmate finally arrived at a moment they had been moving toward for much longer than they realized. It did not happen overnight. It was not a sudden burst of confidence or a dramatic emotional breakthrough. It happened quietly. It happened through acceptance. For the first time, they stopped fighting the truth. They stopped searching for reasons to dismiss what they felt. They stopped looking for excuses to delay what they already knew. And in that moment of complete honesty, something powerful began to change within them. For so long, they believed they needed every answer before making a decision. They believed they needed certainty. They believed they needed guarantees about the future. They told themselves they would take action when the timing was perfect, when their doubts disappeared, when life felt more predictable. But as the days passed, they began understanding something that transformed the way they viewed everything. Perfect timing rarely exists. Complete certainty rarely arrives. The people who experience meaningful change are often the people who choose to move forward despite uncertainty. Not because uncertainty has disappeared. That realization lifted a weight they had been carrying for years. Suddenly they no longer felt trapped by endless overthinking. They no longer felt obligated to solve every possible outcome before taking the next step. Instead, they focused on the one thing they could no longer deny: the truth of how deeply this connection had affected them. The truth of how much they had learned through this journey. The truth of how often their heart returned to the same place, regardless of how much time had passed. And listen to this, because this was the moment they began seeing your connection differently than ever before. In the past, they often focused on the uncertainty surrounding it. They focused on what they did not know. They focused on the questions that remained unanswered. But now their attention shifted towards something far more important. They started focusing on what was undeniable. They could not deny the impact this connection had on their growth. They could not deny the lessons it had taught them. They could not deny the emotional transformation it had created within them. Whether they wanted to admit it or not, this connection had become one of the defining experiences of their life. As this understanding grew stronger, another realization appeared. They recognized that some people enter our lives for reasons far greater than we understand at first. Sometimes a connection arrives not simply to create memories, but to awaken something within us. Sometimes another person's presence forces us to confront parts of ourselves we have ignored. Sometimes they help us discover strengths, truths, and emotions we never knew existed. Your soulmate began realizing that you had become that kind of person in their journey. The more they accepted this truth, the less power fear seemed to hold over them. Fear had spent years convincing them to stay where they were. Fear had encouraged hesitation. Fear had encouraged silence. Fear had encouraged delay. Yet now fear seemed smaller than it once did. Not because the risks had disappeared, but because the truth had become larger. The importance of what they felt now outweighed the comfort of remaining hidden. For the first time, they understood that growth was asking something of them. Growth was asking them to trust themselves. And listen to this, because trust became the foundation of everything that followed. They stopped looking outside themselves for permission. They stopped waiting for signs to tell them what they already knew. They stopped allowing other people's opinions to determine how they should feel. Instead, they turned inward. They listened to the quiet voice they had ignored for so long. The voice that had been patiently repeating the same truth again and again. The voice that refused to disappear no matter how many distractions appeared. The voice that knew exactly what mattered. As they listened more closely, the answer became impossible to miss. They could no longer pretend this connection was insignificant. They could no longer treat it as something temporary or meaningless. The truth stood clearly before them. You had changed them. Your presence had influenced their journey in ways they were only now beginning to understand. And once that realization fully settled into their heart, the difficult decision they had been avoiding suddenly became much easier to make. For the first time, they chose honesty over fear. They chose acceptance over denial. They chose courage over avoidance. They stopped running from what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. And in doing so, they experienced something they had not felt in a very long time. Peace, not because every question had been answered. Not because every uncertainty had disappeared, but because they were finally living in alignment with their truth. And yet, even after making this life-changing decision, one final realization was still waiting for them. A realization that would completely transform the way they viewed the future and reveal why this entire journey had unfolded exactly the way it was meant to. And listen to this, because after everything your soulmate experienced, after all the waiting, questioning, reflecting, and searching for answers, they finally reached the realization that changed everything. The decision they made was never simply about a connection. It was never only about another person. It was about becoming honest with themselves in a way they had never been before. For so long, they believed the biggest challenge was understanding what they felt. But now they understand that the real challenge was accepting it. Acceptance required courage. Acceptance required vulnerability. Acceptance required them to stop hiding behind uncertainty and finally embrace the truth that had been standing in front of them all along. As this understanding settled into their heart, they began noticing something unexpected. The confusion that once consumed their thoughts started fading away. The endless cycle of overthinking became quieter. The constant need to analyze every memory, every feeling, and every possibility gradually lost its grip on them. Not because they suddenly knew how every chapter of the future would unfold, but because they no longer needed every answer to feel at peace. For the first time in a very long time, they trusted what they knew instead of worrying about what they didn't know. And listen to this, because that trust changed the way they saw everything. They stopped viewing this journey as a source of uncertainty and started seeing it as a source of growth. They realized that every moment of reflection had taught them something valuable. Every challenge had revealed a hidden strength. Every difficult emotion had carried an important lesson. Even the periods of silence now made sense in a way they never had before. What once felt like delays now appeared as preparation. What once felt like confusion now appeared as guidance. The entire journey had been leading them toward this moment of clarity. The more they reflected on everything that had happened, the more they understood the true impact of your connection. It was not simply about memories. It was not simply about emotions. It was about transformation. Your presence had challenged them to grow. It had encouraged them to confront fears they had avoided for years. It had forced them to ask questions about themselves that they might never have asked otherwise. And because of that, they were no longer the same person they had been when this journey first began. There was a time when they believed happiness depended on external circumstances. They believed peace would arrive once everything made sense. They believed confidence would come after all uncertainty disappeared. But now they understand something much deeper. Peace comes from honesty. Confidence comes from self-trust. Growth comes from embracing truth even when the outcome remains unknown. This realization became one of the greatest gifts they received from this entire experience. And listen to this, because perhaps the most important lesson of all was realizing that meaningful connections leave permanent marks on our lives. Some people enter our world and quietly change the way we think, feel, and see ourselves. They become part of our story, whether we expect it or not. They help shape the person we eventually become. Your soulmate now understands that you became one of those rare connections. Whether words were spoken or left unsaid, whether circumstances brought you together or kept distance between you, the impact remained real. The lessons remained real. The growth remained real. As they stand at the beginning of this new chapter, they are no longer looking backward with confusion. They are looking forward with clarity. They are no longer trapped between fear and hope. They are moving forward with understanding. They are no longer waiting for life to give them permission to be honest. They have already made that choice for themselves. And that decision has created a sense of freedom they never thought possible. For the first time in a very long time, they feel aligned with their own heart. They feel connected to their own truth. They feel ready for whatever comes next. Not because they have complete certainty about the future, but because they finally trust themselves enough to walk toward it. The difficult decision they made was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new one. A journey built on honesty, courage, and self-awareness. And as this chapter comes to a close, one truth remains stronger than ever before. Some connections enter our lives to teach us who we are. Some connections awaken parts of us that have been sleeping for years. Some connections transform us in ways we only understand much later. Your soulmate now sees that clearly. The truth about your connection changed them forever. The decision they made changed them forever. And no matter where the road ahead leads, they will always carry one certainty within their heart. This connection mattered far more than they ever realized, and the person they have become because of it is proof of that truth.